All right, good evening, everybody. Thank y'all for joining the first webinar of the Spring 2023 Justice Education Series. So my name is Mako Faniel. I'm a Black man who was once a Black boy, who came from a Black family, who lived in a Black family that grew up on the north side of Houston, Texas. My family and the communities that I came from experienced the harm of mass incarceration, largely because of what Dr. Khalil Muhammad calls the condemnation of Blackness, but also because when I was growing up, Houston became a major staging location for Ronald Reagan's drugs. At the PD Green program, I serve as the Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Education. This means three things. I'm responsible for internal and external diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. I help volunteers become ethical tutors and help them become advocates for systemic change by connecting them to the thinkers, scholars, activists, and programs that are focused on systemic change, particularly when it comes to educational justice for currently and formerly incarcerated people. I also come to this webinar as a professor at Virginia Union University, where I'm teaching a class titled The Black Family in the Age of Mass Incarceration. So in partnership with the Center for African American History and Culture at Virginia Union University, we're hosting this webinar of the same title. So many of you have joined us virtually this evening to understand two things. The various ways that mass incarceration has harmed Black people and Black communities, but also learn how we can advocate for policies that restore Black families and Black communities. And so this webinar and the class that I teach is inspired by an article written by Ta-Nehisi Coates in 2015 titled The Black Family in the Age of Mass Incarceration. In this article, Coates reflects back on Daniel Patrick Moynihan's 1965 report called The Negro Family in the Negro Family, A Case for National Action. So let me briefly try to explain the report and why it's important. So Daniel Patrick Moynihan is this white sociologist turned politician who, when my mother was 4 years old, wrote some damning things about Black families in general and my Black mothers and Black children in particular. Pause for a second. I keep bringing in the personal because I want people to understand that we're not distant from this. So in 1965, in what is famously called the Moynihan Report, he tried to explain racial and economic inequalities that existed in the early 1960s. Of course, this is 20 to 30 years after the affirmative action programs offered to white people in the form of the New Deal and the war that saved the nation from financial ruin and in the process created the white middle class. He began his analysis arguing that the mid-1960s uprisings were the result of white racism, not Black culture. According to Moynihan, white racism in the form of government, corporate, private, and racial violence denied Black folks economic citizenship. Therefore, he believed that something more than civil rights legislation was needed to help Black people and prevent future uprisings. And that's where all of his good sense ended. The bulk of the report that became famous for its assertions about Black family life interprets economic and social data to determine that white racism in the form of slavery, segregation, and discrimination had damaged Black people almost beyond repair. For Moynihan, the damage was most evident in Black families, where because Black men had either been pushed out of the house or whose patriarchal power was limited by the forces of racism, too many households were led by single Black mothers who raised badass crime-prone Black children. Moynihan called this a tangled pathology, in which poverty, low intelligence, and low educational attainment, sexual immorality, underachievement, and criminal behavior are passed from generation to generation. This, of course, has been debunked over and over again. But when the Watts uprising jumped off a few months after the Moynihan report was released, journalists, liberals, and conservatives used the report as evidence that Southern racism wasn't the problem. Rather, it was the criminogenic Black family. The report had no recommendations to help Black families. But as Coates argues in his refutation, America had an app for that. Moynihan's misinterpretation became public policy, education policy, theology, parental advice, and praxis. His racist ideas not only produced racist policy, they became the air that we breathe and the predominant thought that we have about Black families. So for those who have never heard of the report, we are breathing it and talking about it in the ways that we think about Black folks and Black families, and also how we punish Black people. And according to Ta-Nehisi Coates, the ascendant policies and practices that came about at the end of the 1960s to the end of the 20th century created mass incarceration that greatly impacted Black people and Black communities. All right. And so I'm not gonna, I was gonna quote from Coates here, but I want to save y'all from hearing my voice because y'all have a lot of people to talk about, and y'all can buy my memoir later when I talk about this. So tonight, we are here to grapple with this and discuss what the biblical writer Paul would call a way to escape. So in a second, I will introduce us to our moderator, who will then introduce our panelists. But first, I want to explain how we will proceed. All right. The moderator will give a brief introduction and further framing. Then each panelist will give a flash talk, where for about 5 minutes, they present to us about their organization, the policies that they're working on, and how we can support their efforts, and how they enter this space on advocating for Black families that are harmed by the carceral state. After flash talks, the panelists will engage in a brief conversation to extend the discussion. We will then spend the rest of our time taking questions from the audience. To ask questions, please use the Q&A function, and we will answer them from there. All right, so during the webinar, don't hesitate to live tweet. So if you pull out your phones right now, you can tweet what's going on. Use the hashtag PGP Justice Ed, PD Green Program Justice Ed. Lastly, at the end of the webinar, please stay on to complete the feedback survey. And I had a thought before I introduce Dr. Muhammad. So the PD Green Program is named after Ralph Waldo P.D. Green, who was a child of incarcerated parents. His father was in Alcatraz, and his mother spent time in prison also. Who was raised in Washington, D.C., who had spent time incarcerated, but became a pioneering Black radio personality, and DJ and media personality. And so he fought for the rights of formerly incarcerated folks, but Black people in general. And so we do this work in honoring him, but also those that are harmed by the carceral state, by exclusion of education and other practices. All right. So now I will put you in the hand of a moderator who will then introduce our panelists. So tonight we have Dr. Bahir Muhammad as our moderator. So we're excited to have Dr. Muhammad. Dr. Muhammad is a tenured associate professor of criminology at Howard University, where teaching and research focuses on children of incarcerated parents. Dr. Muhammad has also been hanging out with us for exactly 2 years as the principal consultant for the PD Green Program's HBCU Forward Initiative at Howard University. And so I thank you, Dr. Muhammad, for the work that you do, and thank you for moderating this panel. And I now leave you in the hands of Dr. Muhammad, who will introduce Chelsea Higgs-Wise, Josie Pickens, Dominique Jones, and Dominique Jones-Johnson, and Regent Lepore. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Mako. I am definitely very excited about this dialogue and conversation, as I've been waiting as the weeks have been going to be able to engage with such a phenomenal panel of individuals. I would like to give gratitude to the PD Green Program for this particular justice series and kicking it off, looking specifically at mass incarceration and the Black family. I have conducted numerous years of qualitative research around the world with families directly impacted by mass incarceration, centering the voices of Black and Brown individuals across the African diaspora. And so now more so than any time, it is very important to dialogue and engage with those individuals that are on the grounds doing this work. In 2011, I launched a study publication called Exploring the Silence Among Children of Incarcerated Parents that was published through Rutgers University, my original study that really looked at the ways in which children of incarcerated parents were directly impacted and sought to seek out the voices of the children themselves to understand not only the experience, but the dynamics behind the resilience, and much of what is left out of the framing around mass incarceration. If you pick up any of the articles now, you're starting to see in 2013 as well as in 2022, much of the research has garnered and is looking at Black women, looking at ways in which they are targeted, how they are hypervigilant, how they are unseen, how they are the individuals that are also the backbone of supporting the movement as it relates to families that are directly impacted. Myself, I have interviewed the grandmothers, I've interviewed the mothers, I've interviewed the children, but I've also spoken very intimately and directly with my own family members, including my children, who are children of incarcerated parents, to understand the dynamics of what it means to continue to carry a legacy where the world sees you one way, and in fact, you see yourself very differently. I am very honored to be here today and excited to hear from the individuals that will be sharing and giving us their flash talks. Instead of your traditional kind of reading of the bios, we thought that it would be organic and conversational to give individuals the opportunity during their flash talks to give us some of that information connected to their organizations, the work that they're doing on numerous policy avenues, but also how they entered into this work. Many individuals are always interested in understanding what brought you into this work. For tonight, we're going to be starting with Chelsea Higgs-Wise, who is the co-founder and executive director of Marijuana Justice. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Sounds great. Well, thank you again for Petey Green Foundation for having me. My name is Chelsea Higgs-Wise, and I am the co-founder and executive director of Marijuana Justice, where we are formed to bring repeal the prohibition, repair to our communities, and reparations for the drug war. How I got into this work, and I really love Dr. Muhammad's intro, because I did have quite an intro and enter into this work. For a long time, I was actually working as a clinical social worker for over a decade. I served on several boards with DSS and mental health. And then right here in my community, Marcus David Peters was shot and killed by a Richmond police officer while he suffered from a mental health attack. He was completely naked, derobed, and therefore unarmed when the police officer decided to take his life. And that was really my call down to many folks in my community that knew me for a long time to say I could not do something from this board, but needed to do something in the streets. And so what I did is actually start a local radio show called Race Capital. And that was my contribution to this movement, to be able to tell the real story of Marcus David Peters, of his family, but also of organizers doing anti-policing work for years prior to this horrible tragedy. And then in 2019, many folks might remember that across the country, folks were talking about 400 years since Africans were first trafficked right here to Virginia shores. And unfortunately, that February, Virginia also had to live through our current governor at the moment. His medical school yearbook was exposed to where there was a man dressed up in KKK robe and blackface under his name. And so this idea of reconciliation and what Virginia can do, particularly through policy, came up on the grounds of the Capitol while we literally protested the entire month of February, saying, how in the world can we talk about 400 years in Virginia and our governor has this type of history? So there was a call right then, and we decided we needed to do something to actually free our people and dispel this legacy of Virginia of enslavement and engaging our folks, to repair our communities and these records that are holding us back, and to bring revenue and reinvestment into our community. And that's what we really heard on the Capitol when people were angry, when they were upset, when they looked at these supposed leaders that was supposed to bring change for Virginia were doing this. And so Marijuana Justice was really born out of that lane to say, how can we use repealing the drug war to stop policing, to free our people, and to bring reinvestment back in? And our organization and our folks were also very heavily into the Free Them All campaign to decarcerate the jails and prisons. In 2020, when COVID first started, we had car rallies all across the city around the jails. And as well as Black Lives Matter movement for the global uprising. We were in the streets for 100 days holding it down. And this is when Marijuana Justice was completely volunteer. And I will say that I'm really grateful for that time because we were able to find funding from people that really cared about a message of abolition and decarceration. And in 2021, I'm really excited to say that our work was able to bring Virginia to be the first state in the South to repeal the prohibition of simple possession and seal the records of over 64,000 people. You know, that was just a snapshot of how I got here. And I really wanted to say that the community got me here, like grassroots organizing got me here. I'm a local radio show host, but that was really just my contribution to like pass the mic because we never hear our stories. And it was those stories that brought us here. So what we actually do as Marijuana Justice is that we educate with our community on the disproportionate enforcement. Honestly, all we do is validate what the community already knows, right? Like we're giving them the data, these I call them the white resume validation points, like the data that a lot of folks need instead of just understanding our stories. And then our organization also drafts real proposals to decrease enforcement. So just now we passed a Senate bill to resentence and review the sentences for people incarcerated for marijuana to reduce those sentences and release them. To also stop criminalizing parents that are now legally using marijuana in visitation and custody battles. We're also looking at redistributing these revenue back to family members of incarcerated and people criminalized for marijuana. Again, not just the person incarcerated, but also the family members. So we're really doing some really innovative work policy-wise, particularly in the South. And you know why we do this? We do this to free our people. We do this to stop the surveillance. We do this to reunite our Black family members so that we can really have the self-determination for our legacy versus this drug war that has been hitting our families for over 50 years. You know, why is this some critical timing? I'm just going to go through this really quickly, but we're seeing that women are now incarcerated for the drug war at just exponential rates now. We talk about Black men, now we need to start looking at Black women particularly. And then what it means in a post-legalization era for criminalization of the Black families and Black communities. People are building more prisons. Maryland is actually looking at creating new law divisions to go after marijuana as they legalize. So, you know, our organization is really looking at how is mass incarceration of our family members going to continue post this quote unquote legalization world? And what can we really do to stop that? Knowing the intention of the war on drugs was always to harm and attack our families and our wealth. And I'm right at my time, and I will make sure that the Peter Green Foundation gets this, but everyone's always asking like how you can help and how you all can help us. But what we really tell people is validate the stories and the research of your place, space, and time of prohibition and how you can repeal those right now. And we have some great examples, so you don't have to think of them. You can go to our website, Marijuana Justice, and continue to talk to me. But that is really what we do here at Marijuana Justice, is that we're continuing to educate people on their rights. We're continuing to bring their stories forward and continuing to repeal the enforcement that continues to incarcerate our family members.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, for all of that information and letting us know how you got into it, but also we can hear your passion and expertise. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to have a brief conversation about some of the things that you talked about. We are going to be moving on to our second flash talk, which will happen from José Pickens, Program Director of the Up In Movement. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. As she said, my name is Josie Pickens. I am the Program Director of Up In Movement. Much like I'm sure most folks on the panel, I grew up, or maybe depending on our ages, I think about being born in the late 70s and kind of coming of age in the 80s and 90s, deep in, the period of the Reaganomics and the war on drugs, and seeing firsthand what it did to our communities, living in what I felt like was a militarized police state in my community, and it really radicalized me. Up In Movement is actually an abolition-centered collaborative movement that focuses on abolishing the family policing system, which we more adequately call the, the child welfare system, which we more adequately call the family policing system. Let me get that straight. So I'll be referring to it as the family policing system as I move forward. Growing up in a Black community in the 80s and 90s meant that I got to see on both hands how these policing systems work. And it's important to realize that both of these systems are systems that are rooted in policing and rooted in carceral logic. So on one hand, you know, just operating and moving through the community, seeing so many of the families that I knew, so many friends kind of being caught up in the criminal legal system. And also at the same time, seeing so many of my friends and their families being caught up in the child welfare system or the family policing system. You know, one system, you know, with folks facing incarceration, one system seeing families separated, and understanding that these two systems are, you know, work completely together. And so early on, maybe when I was about 19 or so, I started organizing, doing a lot of grassroots community organizing. Back then, you know, we still believed in reforms. This was before we really understood maybe that abolition was possible. And so a lot of my early work in grassroots community organizing kind of focused on prison industrial complex reform. Later that moved into abolition for me. And then we've moved more forward, the organizations that I work with outside of UpIn and in collaboration with UpIn on mutual aid support in communities. And so that is a bit of my background and how I came to this work. Doing that community organizing for over 20 years. Why do I do the work? Because I want to create a world or be a part of the creation of a world that is so much better and so much more safe and more loving than the world that I was born into and the world that I've experienced. I have a 17-year-old daughter and consider myself to be a mother and auntie in the communities that I'm a part of. And when I look at the youth, when I look at the babies, I just know that they deserve a new world, and I am all for imagining that. And that's pretty much it. I love Black folks. I always have. My parents are from a small farming town in Louisiana that was an all-Black town. And so I grew up with this great love for family and community around Black folks. And I've just continued to move that into my work. When I think about how UpIn movement kind of connects to these conversations around the carceral state and Black families, I just go back to saying that the family policing system and the criminal legal system are inextricable. They come together with this idea of carceral logic. What do we do at UpIn movement? As I said earlier, we're a movement that collaborates and coalition builds with other organizations to work towards the abolition of the family policing system. We understand that abolition is the only way. Many of the initial founders and early advisors in UpIn movement came through the child welfare system, working in the child welfare system first, you know, as social workers or others that were working in the system, then trying to move to reforming the system and making change in the system, then beginning to have the understanding that this system is working exactly the way that it was intended to, and therefore reform will never work. This is a system that was built on anti-Blackness and white supremacy. And until we deal with those issues as a nation, we understand that there is no amount of reform that can happen that is going to change either the criminal legal system or the family policing system. A lot of our work focuses on research and public education that is used in a number of ways. We work with different organizers and impacted folk to amplify voices and tell stories. We work on providing research that essentially provides context to what so many of us already know. As I said, living in these impacted communities, being impacted folks ourselves. A lot of our research and public education, initially kind of focused on what we call flooding the field. We are situated inside of the Graduate College of Social Work at the University of Houston. And so initially, when we formed Up In Movement, we were thinking about how can we get social workers and social work students to think about the harm that is happening in this system, and how can we get them to fight for change. We then began to realize that in addition to social workers and social work students, we also needed to make sure that the public understood that this system is not a helping system in the way that it's presented. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing, we're developing a podcast, we've been doing lots of public conversations. We hold an annual convening. This year, our convening invited the Angela Davis and Miriam Kaba to come and speak about abolition, why it is the only way forward, and particularly about family policing abolition. So that is a lot of the work that we do. It's around research, it is around providing public education, but also we do a lot of coalition building work where we work with organizations that are doing grassroots work to help families that are being harmed within this system. And we also understand that 53% of Black children and Black families are going to be investigated by the family policing system. We understand the disparities that go into the fact that Black children, because they are investigated more, Black families, because they are investigated more, we understand that in addition to investigation, there are going to be family separations. There are going to be Black children that enter into the foster care system, Black children, Black families, and Black parents that experience the termination of parental rights. And we know that for those who face incarceration or who have faced incarceration, those statistics are even higher. We know that these particular communities are impacted even more. When asked, what do we want volunteers or the broader public to know about how Black families are impacted by mass incarceration? Again, as someone who works in the family policing abolition space, I want people who hope to help Black families and communities to understand that the child welfare system and the criminal legal system are linked together. They come together under this idea of carceral logic, which is this idea that we need systems outside of ourselves to help our families, to help our communities, to quote unquote, keep us safe, regardless of how that happens and by any means necessary. And that protection only comes through surveillance, regulation, and punishment. So we see this represented in both systems. And we want people to understand the disproportionality of how Black folks and Black families are affected in both systems. We want folks to be informed about, legislations, laws, acts that make the families of incarcerated folks have to deal with so much in order to build family and keep family together. When we think about acts like the Adoption and Safe Families Act that was enacted in 1997, that basically says that parents who might be incarcerated, if they have a child that is separated from them and in foster care for 15 months out of 22 consecutive months, then their parental rights can be absolved and taken away from them. Once that happens, we know that there is no hope for reunification of that family, of that child, and of that parent. We also know that the criminal legal system just makes it very difficult for families to continue to create bonding moments, to come together, whether we're talking about visitations or whether we're talking about families just being penalized because they have a family member that is a part of this system. Just having a criminal history is considered a risk factor for child maltreatment. So even if we have a parent who is has been incarcerated previously, there is an opportunity for them not to be able to have a relationship or to build family, to stay with their children, that they will be separated from their children just because of what we call a criminal history, right? Having a criminal history often prevents non-married biological fathers and other relatives from having children placed with them once a child enters foster care. So these are just some of the things that I want people to be aware of. This is a system that from its inception was created to separate Black families, both systems. And when I think about what questions I wish people would ask about family policing abolition or criminal legal system abolition, I just think about asking about what is next, what else is possible. A lot of times when we talk about abolition, people are so focused on, but what will we do? What is this system? Like, what do we need to do within this system? What can we change in this system? Instead of using our imaginations to think about, like, what do safe families and communities, what do healthy families and communities look like outside of these systems? And so I really wish that people would be more curious about that and be a part of that conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Josie. You gave quite a few topics that I'll be picking back up into our brief conversation. I want to move on to our next Flash Talk expert, Dominique Jones-Johnson, who serves as the Executive Director and founder of Daughters Beyond Incarceration and Parenting from Prison. Welcome.
Hey, everyone. I am going to show you a video and I'll get to some important facts after the video. So I'm going to share my screen. My name is Dominique Johnson. I'm the founder and executive director of Daughters Beyond Incarceration. And the state of Louisiana ripped my life apart because my Black father looked like another Black man. And now he's serving a life without parole in Angola State Penitentiary. Daughters Beyond Incarceration works with girls between the ages of 8 to 18 who live in low-income communities in New Orleans and have a parent or a loved one that is incarcerated. Initially, when we started in 2018, we had 2 girls. Now we have over 150 girls that are registered in our program. We help these girls focus on advocacy, public awareness, youth development, youth leadership, and most importantly, we teach them how to change the laws. We're creating youth advocates. We're creating youth dreamers. We are giving the girls an opportunity to see themselves in a position that they don't normally see. One of the things that I'm really excited about that we are working on now is hiring some of the older girls in our program to actually work and give back. So we want to try to create a pathway program so that those girls are, if they're not going to school, then they can come back and find some type of work, if not for us, then one of our partner nonprofits, to figure out what they want to do. And we overall create a holistic effect of what it means to reimagine the criminal justice system, because it includes bringing children to the table. So that's a little bit about what it is that I do with Daughters Beyond Incarceration. Everybody has general memories about what their relationship is like with their father. Every time I think about my father, I think about the first time I saw him shackled and chained. It was at his father's funeral. That's the first time I had ever seen my father outside of prison bars. He was shackled and chained, and he was escorted by 2 corrections officers. Nobody prepared me for it.
Nobody told me it was going to happen. And he was the only one that actually took time to ask me, are you okay? And so that's why I do this work. That's how I got into this work, because someone outside of my father should have asked me, are you okay? In 2019, we passed a bill that created a council for children of incarcerated parents and caregivers. Biggest thing I had ever done, because I gave an opportunity to children and caregivers to be at the table with lawmakers and create and be a part of decisions that impact their lives. Today, the girls in my program and I are currently working on lowering phone fees, because in order for us to talk to our loved ones, you have to have a minimum of $10 to upload to the account, and it costs you roughly about $10 to $15 for a 15-minute phone call. I currently have 4 children, and it's hard for one phone call, one person to talk to all of the children in the house for 15 minutes. So we're working to lower those phone fees so that it won't be as much of a barrier to talk to the loved ones, to talk to their children. What I want you guys to know is that children with incarcerated parents, we're different. You know, we're not wired like everyone else. And you have to understand that it takes courage to love someone from behind bars, to not be embarrassed of what they are incarcerated for, but most importantly, to understand the mind of someone that is incarcerated. And that takes a lot of courage, and you have to be bold and strong to do that. And that's what I do. When I work with these girls, I give them transparent mentorship, and I lead with the impact that I want you to understand what it's like to grow up and to do work that helps the people that you love. And by doing that, you're changing the cycle of transformation in your family. So that's it for me, Doc.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed that video to share. Hopefully that'll be something shared in the chat for individuals. As you all see, we have questions that are coming in as we are waiting to move into the brief conversation. Please feel free to respond to some of those questions. We will be lifting some of them up so that we can hear directly from you on those as well. And moving on to our final presenter for our speed talks, we have Regent LaCour, who serves as the mentee as one of the daughters behind Beyond Incarceration. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Regent. Of course, you all know that now. But yeah, so of course I'm a mentee of Daughters Beyond Incarceration. I've been there for a while. And I feel that it's important for younger persons to be leaders, because as a young person growing up, like as you're starting to get aware of the things that's going on when you're visiting your mom, dad, whoever's incarcerated for you, it's like, it's really hard. And it's easier to have somebody who's there, like you're able to talk through it with them and they're able to comfort you in a way that another person wouldn't, because they don't have that person who's incarcerated for them. And it's never easy. So it is easy to have that person there. And I will always recommend that. Like, you always need somebody there who firsthand knows what you're going through, because it's never going to get easier. And my next question was, oh, well, I am a mentee of DBI. So if you do feel unsure, you can always look us up. They do have other programs as well that do as well as what we do. I'm not sure of all of them right now, but I know if you're able to look up DBI, we definitely able to like contact you any type of way if you get in touch with us as well. We do hold monthly meetings if you ever like have, because we do have younger people as well that's in the program, that's in like schools in Louisiana as well. So if you do, feel like you want to reach out to them, you can as well, because we all friendly. We all going to help you at the end of the day. We're all here for the same reason. We just want to help our incarcerated people get out at the end. So, yeah. And my next question was, what are my future plans? When I was 13 years old, I delivered my nephew in the hospital. He's no, I'm sorry. I be feeling so old when I say that. 5 or 6 years old. But yeah, it just made me like really, really happy and excited. It was an amazing experience. And I just wouldn't like see myself doing any other thing. That's always what I want to do since then. And then I just had to talk with my mom about it today too. It's just I have to be prepared for the hardships of that because I know I watch a lot of like doctor shows and you don't always things don't always go as you planned. Like you might not always bring the mom and the baby out in the end. And it's like, I don't like right now, that's what I need to get better with. And that's what I'm looking forward to. But I know it's going to be a hardship for me in the end because I'm not a big person on loss. But, and then I have this little it's not a hidden talent because if you know me, I mean, I definitely don't hide it. But I have like this talent of nails. I don't do nails. I'm really planning on doing it soon, but I'm real creative when it comes to that. I can't draw for nothing, but when it comes to nails, I can pick up any type of design for you, I swear. But I definitely want to do that as well because I want to travel along the way as well. I want to do other things. I want to just be out. I don't want to be held down in one state because Louisiana isn't, it just showed me this isn't somewhere where I want to be. And it's not somewhere where I want to stay in one place. It just shows me I want to do other things, experience other things. And DBI has supported my plans for the future because when I first met Dominique, it was kind of like it wasn't a hard time, but it was kind of like a hard time. And she helped us a lot along the way because I do have a sister as well. And she helped us along the way because, like I said, as we growing up, we like starting to be aware of like what's going on. Those hardships of going to my dad, seeing him in prison, not being able to talk to him, knowing where he is and things like that. It's just real hard. And it's like, she showed me like a better way to handle things. She showed me you can make change. She takes us to the Capitol. She do things like that makes us want to overcome our fears as well. It just makes you show that you could do whatever you want. You just have to push through it. You got to keep going for it. You got to have dedication. You can't stop. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for just giving us the insight, but more importantly, for the commitment and the work that you do on a regular basis, decade after decade after decade, and continuing to not only rebrand your organizations, but yourself. And it is a testament to the strength that we have as individuals. We're going to move now into a brief conversation. Really, it's going to be conversational in the sense that it'll be guided by some kind of questions, but really trying to probe and gain a little bit understanding about some of the things that you talked about. I'm going to start with you, Chelsea, because as we're thinking about the framing of this dialogue and conversation, starting with that place of the war on drugs, oftentimes we hear this all the time. If you are studying it in the academy, if you are working with a grassroots organization, if you are pushing policy in the White House, individuals often use this as the historical landscape for which and where a conversation ultimately starts. The one thing that I think is oftentimes missing is the reasoning behind how specifically things like marijuana criminalization impact specifically the Black family. So for you, Chelsea, I really would like you to give us a little bit more insight to the 127 individuals that are here with us now on how specifically marijuana criminalization impacts Black families.
Thank you for that question. Many folks by now might have heard that the Nixon administration is actually on record stating that the prohibition of marijuana specifically is to target Black people. And of course, he did not give us as much respect to use those words to even reference us as Black folks. So just to also open up that framing that these laws were created to target Black people and Black families very specifically. And what that means is that they are able to pull us over. They're able to target us in different types of pedestrian ways. And how that really impacts the Black family is that there's really nowhere that we can be safe without this types of surveillance. And marijuana specifically, and what we have learned is that just the smell of marijuana or what law enforcement will say is the smell of marijuana is really the gateway opening to being able to criminalize anyone. And that's been able to, like in Virginia, we have over 600 people inside still for marijuana related offenses. We right now are still criminalizing parents that might test positive for marijuana, even though it is legal right now. You know, something about myself that I'll share in many places is that my father was also incarcerated for drug-related offenses. And, you know, what it really is like is that it's, someone said in the beginning, is this dissonance of knowing who the people are that are inside and hearing what society is saying about them. And marijuana specifically in the media and the way the Just Say No campaign and the way that we were taught to criminalize people in proximity to marijuana is really just criminalizing Black people. In Virginia, they have particularly Black folks are 3.9 times the rate of white folks to be incarcerated and criminalized for marijuana. And that is a very consistent stat over the United States. And I'm saying this very specifically to say that when people are criminalized, they lose their job. They're unable to find employment. We have people here in Virginia that when COVID was happening, just simple charges that may not have led them to prison, then stopped them from getting a house and even got them evicted from places that they had been there 2 years just because the landlord wanted them out. We have parents unable to have visitation and foster care and custody for these reasons. And it's just another barrier. And the saddest thing about it is I bring up the Nixon thing again, is because many times these are lies. Even if people are marijuana users, they are lies. And there are ways that is a believable way for the carceral system to then be able to legally criminalize us with actually no proof except for a police officer saying, well, I smelled marijuana.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It becomes more and more important for individuals to not only understand their rights, but also have the courage, similar to what Dominique talked about, that concept of courage, to be able to stand up for yourself, not only for yourself, but for others. And it's an interesting time now, right? Like as we are traveling around the world, we see all of these places where marijuana is legal, and there are drones of individuals that are now going into places to actually purchase marijuana. At the same time, we have this kind of oxymoron of many individuals that are still incarcerated for very, very long times due to the draconian incarceration law systems that put the hands behind the judges and required them to kind of use a chart in order to determine the legacy and livelihood of individual family members that would be incarcerated and torn away from their families for a very, very long time, and some of them still in the system now. So thank you so much for sharing some of the current things that are still happening in those particular areas. I want to move on to a question specifically for Josie. You mentioned being born in the late 80s, really, coming up in the time of the war on drugs. And, there's a certain look to a city when it's struck by the war on drugs, abandoned buildings. Many of the criminological or sociological theories called that social disorganization. There were theories that came out about codes of the street where it taught individuals how to maneuver in those sort of environments. But we know that there were many individuals that we loved and endeared that were struck by a system that now we see individuals today being dependent on a different kind of drug, that it's being treated as a health issue as opposed to a criminal issue. I'm very interested to learn more about the transition that you talked about from moving from reform to abolition. You talked about not having a full understanding of the importance of that being a possibility. What happened during that transformation, and what advice do you have for the individuals here that are also treading the line between reform and abolition?
So I want to begin by saying, yes, exactly what you're saying. I definitely remember, when we experienced the crack epidemic in our community. I definitely now look at what is happening around drug use and advocacy and care, the fact that it's looked at as a health issue, mental, emotional, physical health issue now, as opposed to just a pathology, an issue of criminalization. It hurts. It hurts because I remember growing up and seeing families torn apart by having loved ones involved in these systems who really needed care, who really needed help, who really asked for help and never received it. And so it's very bittersweet to see the way that we are looking at drug use now, and even some addiction issues, you know, and understanding that the reason that Black folks were not given these opportunities for repair and rehabilitation and healthcare and all around care is because we are not seen as valuable in a way that would make that possible in our lives. Our communities, our families are all not seen as valuable enough to receive that kind of care. As far as moving from ideas of reforming systems to abolishing systems, I think once you've been organizing enough, once you've done enough research, once you have spoken to enough policymakers and change makers and all of these agents, and tried to collaborate with police organizations and tried to have conversations with social workers and all of these other people that are involved in these systems, you realize that there is no amount of reform that is going to change a system that is rooted in the destruction of a people and communities, families, and so forth. When we look at the history of this nation, we understand that this nation was built on the separation of Black families and Indigenous families. Period. That's what slavery was. And we see how even post-slavery, this continued to be a case. Whether we're talking about reform schools, whether we're talking about the incarceration of parents, this perpetual idea that Black families do not deserve care, do not deserve safety, do not deserve second, third, fourth, however many chances it takes, you know? And I think that once you do the research, study history, you see what is happening in these systems, and that all of these reform measures are never putting an end to and ceasing the violence that we experience. And then you realize that we have the power that we are giving away to other folks. One of the questions that was in the Q&A for me is like, what happens when we think about children who are abused by parents? Like, what happens when we're talking about abolition? What happens to those children? And I think we have to dream bigger than thinking that it's only a system that can solve our problems. First of all, I like to say that most children and families that end up having to interact with this system end up in this system because of cases of quote unquote neglect as opposed to abuse. And many, many times, probably 8 out of 10 times, those issues connected to neglect are really issues connected to poverty. So that's first of all. Now, that's not to say that abuse doesn't happen, right? We understand that the way that human beings operate, we understand that sometimes we harm one another. What we believe is that we can give power to families and communities to solve their own problems. We can create different infrastructures in communities that focus on transformative justice, that focus on figuring out how to help instead of how to separate and harm. And we believe that this is possible. It's just about using our imagination and some of the models that are already in place. A lot of times when we're thinking about abolition, we always think that, oh, we have to create something new. But a lot of what we are looking for already exists. We just have to think about how to work it, how to implement it, and how to believe that it's possible and that our folks, are worth it.
Absolutely. This conversation is definitely so rich. I am enjoying every bit and piece of this, and bringing the humanity back to Black families, specifically around mass incarceration, because there's kind of like this concept where you throw a person away because an individual has a sentence or because an individual touched the criminal legal system. You almost throw the individual away and kind of walk away from it. Which makes no sense at all, right? Where do we often, where would we ever kind of do that, right? So I think this conversation is so important in terms of humanizing, empowering, and reminding individuals of the assets that we have in the ways that we're able to love each other, love on ourselves, and also love the actions that we take in moving forward and standing our ground in that instance. I want to move to Dominique, specifically because we're talking about the ways in which individuals are specifically affected. I think in your testimony and in the beautiful video that you shared, and just a bit small of the dialogue that you shared in your direct experiences in the work that you do, oftentimes I hear students and individuals in the communities feeling as though direct experiences get in the way. That there's this concept specifically in research where individuals are to be objective as opposed to subjective, that if you are close in proximity to in a situation or an incident, you're not able to necessarily study it and or understand it. And of course, we know that is the opposite, right? Because when you're directly connected with something, you know what to ask, how to connect, how to engage, ways to explore. You could open things in ways that others can't. I'm specifically interested in how your direct experiences guide the amazing work that you continue to do for girls of parental incarceration, but specifically looking at the ways in which rage, anger, frustration don't get in your way, disappointment, and any of these different kind of big emotions that many individuals are afraid of when it comes to this work.
Dr. Muhammad, they do get in the way. And I am extremely authentic in the way that I advocate because I show it. So much so that when we set up our budget, there is a line allocation for bond. Because I need these girls to understand that when you growing up without your parent, especially if your parent is incarcerated, you go through so many different emotions. You go through neglect, you go through guilt, you go through shame, you go through embarrassment, and nobody teaches you how to release those. So when I leave, you are not only getting me as an executive director, but you're getting little me, you're getting adolescent me, you're getting teenage me, you're getting that neglected me. And baby, they will tell you I lead loudly and boldly and unapologetically anywhere I go. That is me, that is my character. And you're gonna get every bit of that in everything that I do. The hardest part about this work is that most often researchers will try to tell me how to feel about something that I experienced. There's no way that you can do that. And I, for one, won't allow you to do that. But you cannot tell me how it feels to go through a natural disaster and worry about your incarcerated father. You cannot tell me how to feel about meeting my father for the first time behind prison bars. You cannot tell me how it feels when somebody tells me you have 1 minute left. How the hell are you gonna tell me I have 1 minute left to talk to my daddy? I was born with this dude. Do you know every time I look at my birth certificate, it says father unknown. And it's not because he didn't want to be there. The state of Louisiana truly just ripped my life apart. And I've been dealing with it all my life. My children are dealing with it. And now my husband is dealing with it. That's how deep it is. Because what most people don't understand is incarceration doesn't only affect me directly, it affects my children, it affects my husband, and it affects my friends. So everybody around me has to understand that you may have your certain feelings about incarceration, but you're not going to dehumanize the person who I call daddy. And that means I'm checking you. If you call him an inmate, you call him a convict, you call him a felon, we have a problem, because I'm going to educate you to the most highest extent. And I'm going to hope that you move forward with enough kindness to know that he's still my father. And you don't know the whole story. You don't know how I felt. And I need you to understand that I am a human. And if you don't protect the people in the spaces that you love, then you get what we're working on now, trying to reimagine it, because we haven't stood up for ourselves and haven't stood up for our loved ones. And the sad part about it is we got to stand up. Like, we would all love to live in a world where everyone will be treated equally, but we don't. So Dr. Muhammad, I don't control my emotions when I lead. I allow people to see that authenticity, and to amplify my voice, my teenage voice, my 9-year-old Dominique voice, and my 3-year-old Dominique voice. Because otherwise you'll never know you're not going to know who I could have been if I would have grew up with my father. So when I go into the state capitol to testify, you're getting that true, authentic Dominique. When I go to city meetings or wherever, you get this Dominique.
Absolutely. You get in all of the individual, and I love it. I think this is great. There are definitely some organization leaders here with us, also students that are looking into starting organizations, and individuals that are just interested in doing the work. And oftentimes individuals feel that you got to put some sort of mask on, that you can't bring that into the White House, you can't bring that into the policy realm. So thank you for standing up and sharing yourself openly and honestly. It's very important. I would like to apologize on behalf of all of those individuals that have research skills that may have told you or any individuals in the audience how they feel because of research. That is something that my work is really pushing to break. A lot of the work looking at flipping the script and getting individuals to understand those sort of perspectives.
A lot of researchers like to call what we feel metaphors.
Metaphors, heard it. Yep.
And that's what hurts the most, because a metaphor is not real. And so you're therefore telling me that my feelings aren't real. And to go through a natural disaster, worrying about if you're going to survive your own self, and then to try to control your emotions about the person who you know is incarcerated and cannot leave. They can't evacuate. So they try to box our feelings together and say they metaphorically say, or they metaphorically feel. And that's unfair.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure individuals are learning and listening. I want to move on to region in terms of just gaining a better understanding about young individuals that are involved in this work. Oftentimes, you see individuals get kind of pushed to the side, that you either have the researchers or individuals that are adults who have experienced parental incarceration, looking in retrospect at those specific experiences. Oftentimes you see panels with individuals where they aren't younger individuals, even younger than yourself, that are leading. What would you say about the importance of young voices in this movement? Why is it important to hear the experiences of young individuals directly impacted by parental incarceration?
Because honestly, when you're younger, it affects you when you get older. So it's like you will want to get that help when you're younger, so it could build you. Okay, now I know how to deal with it. Now I know how to move. And it's just not like, no offense to the older people, but it's just we young, you know how to cope with a younger person, you know how to like attach to them, you know how to relate to them more. Like, it's just a thing like that as well, because not saying that people don't have older mentees that they can relate to, but it's like I know a lot of young people will really like to talk to a younger person because they don't feel that open to an older person. That's all.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that, because it's true. Like, when you think about it, It's an interesting concept. And at the end of the day, you want individuals to be able to be open and be free. That's the way you get to be somebody like Miss Dominique, right? That's able to stand in front of an audience and be unapologetically yourself, regardless of where you are, who you are around. It's going to start with opening up, you know, around individuals and being comfortable. Regent, when you think about your experiences, and you talked a little bit about this in terms of like your future plans and your future goals, have you felt ever that your experiences push you and propel you into resilience or into an area that allows you to fly even higher than what you may have thought you've ever been able to accomplish or do?
Yes, because then, you know, a lot of people also do stereotype like, okay, one of your parents incarcerated and might hold you back and things like that. And it's like, that makes me want to push harder, not just for myself, but for him, for my mom, like for everybody, because that all stuff like really reflects upon me. It really does affect me. And I really be wanting to like show that more. That's why I advocate.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Mako, how are we on time?
So it's 7:09 right now. We can go to some of the Q&A questions. Yeah, I wanted to say something while we're here. When we think about so while this is titled "The Black Family in the Age of Mass Incarceration," we are thinking beyond. At the PD Green program, our volunteers learn about a carceral state framework, where they learn about how carceral logics are embedded in the social fabric of the United States. Okay, and so while we're thinking about the family, we're trying to move away from the prison as site and the human encaged to see how all people are impacted by the punishment state. And so I want to call our attention to something that happened last week or 2 weeks ago. And so there was a younger man than myself by the name of Tyree Nichols in Memphis, Tennessee, who was murdered by 5 Black police officers. This is also important, the punitiveness of this. And so the carceral logics behind that, the punishment behind that, left a man dead. And there is a mother and a father who has lost a son. Okay. Samir Rice lost her son. Tamir Rice's sister lost her brother. Sandra Bland's mother lost her daughter. George Floyd left a daughter, left a lover, and a whole community in Houston that is going to mourn him until we join him. And the people that are incarcerated and the cost associated with calling a family member. I think about the movie When They See Us, when the mother of one of the of what we used to call the Central Park Five, because of prison gerrymandering, the cost of being able to travel to the particular prison to see her son on a daily basis, a person that was already impacted by poverty, spending money to go see their child because recognizing that although the state wants to banish my child, you will not banish my child, and my child will know that they're loved. And so let's just bring it back, like to bring it home, that like what we see in the news, that young man that was murdered, his life mattered, but then also the families are now left punished because of the punitiveness that led to murder of Tyree Nichols. So we'll go to the questions in the Q&A, and you can also continue to ask more questions in the Q&A.
Thank you so much for that, Mako, for contextualizing it, but also giving us that macro analysis. When we think about these sort of issues, oftentimes when we think about being directly impacted, we move forward into kind of like the incarceration, and we don't start with the courts, the corrections, and then the police, the 3 different components that make up the criminal legal system themselves. There's a really good question that I'm going to pull from in the Q&A from Kennedy Peterson. Can you discuss in greater detail how important language is when discussing mass incarceration and its impact on personal and social dynamics? I know, Josie, you talked about that as well as Dominique. Not sure if you both would like to start us off, and then our other panelists can jump in as well.
Yeah, I can go. So for me, a lot of it centers around making sure the people understand that my father is still a human. He's not inmate 106785. He's not inmate 102. You can call him Charlie Brown. You can call him Hey Man or whatever, but just don't refer to him in our space as an inmate, a convict, or anything like that. You may find someone like me that will check you, but for the most part, you also have to understand that in this world, it is important to give people grace and kindness. And when you're entering in a space that is highly sensitive to mass incarceration, use words that don't take away the human kindness of another human being. Additionally, you also want to not refer to youth as juvenile. A lot of people don't consider that the children in this mass incarceration world have feelings, and they do have really good ideas. So it's important to refer to them by their names or as youth, but going into a space saying juvenile delinquents, yeah, that's not going to allow them the opportunity to paint a good picture of themselves.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know, Josie, you talked a little bit about looking at the child welfare system and flipping that into the language that encompasses family policing systems. I think that kind of connects to this question as well.
Absolutely. I think it's so important for us to call things what they are, particularly when we're talking about like the child welfare system, because just that title makes us believe that this is a helping system. Right? When so much research shows that this is a system that harms Black families, Latina families, Indigenous families. I think also we need to think about in language, because I'm also a journalist, that language is used to either build or destroy. And so we have to think about the way that we are using language in the same way that Dominique said, like, are we centering people when we use language? Are we speaking with people about people with love and care when we are telling their stories and talking about their experiences? And so I think it's very important. Language, when we're talking about systems, needs to be authentic language and clear language and language that is honest, right? So the child welfare system so often does not help. It does not offer help. It is a policing system that is rooted in carceral logic in the same way that the criminal legal system is rooted in carceral logic. So it's important that we call a thing with respect to that. When we're talking about people, we need to make sure that we are having conversations that consider people's humanity, whether we are talking about those who face incarceration or the people who are maneuvering through this system with them and on their behalf, who are trying to build family and community with them. It's important that we think about ways that and carceral logic goes back into this idea that it's the way that we're all socialized to think, right? We have to punish, we have to surveil, we have to watch, we have to create regulation around all of these things. And so this is the way that our minds operate. So finding language that exists outside of that carceral logic that says what else is possible, right? This is where the dreaming and imagination work comes in when we're talking about abolition. We're talking about ridding ourselves of these systems that we know are archaic, that we know are harmful, particularly to our people. Then we have to think about, well, what kind of language do we want to use to create what is next? Right? And that should be affirming language. It should be language that centers people and humanizes people and shows that we are trying to create families, communities, and if we are talking about systems that are rooted in care and not in harm.
Thank you so much to the both of you for sharing that. I think it's really important, and it's a great thing, specifically as it relates to the pre-degree program, specifically providing educational resources to those individuals that are interested or participating in the tutoring to understand that there are so many publications that are out now, and starting studies in this era in the early 2000s, barely anything, right, around the language. It was kind of like a normal thing to hear the INMATE, word, and dare you not challenge an individual on that, right? Like your program could not enter a facility if you didn't adopt some of that language in the way that it's presented. And now we start to see something different. So there are a lot of resources out there. Thank you both for underlining that and reminding us of the importance of language. There's also an anonymous attendee that has a question specifically. I think, Chelsea, I see that you were kind of answering some of this in the Q&A, but the question looks specifically at how you factor in lawful drug convictions and people who are in prison due to violent crimes in your work around mass incarceration. How do you include those two populations? Because oftentimes, as we know, individuals want to talk about low-level offenders. Don't you dare talk about a violent offense. Otherwise, no funding for you, no publication for you, no access for you. But we do understand the percentages of individuals that are directly impacted. If we think about second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth chances for individuals, this is going to be important. Can you please speak to this question for us?
Yeah, I did jump in and answer this question, and I also answered it in a way of language too, because I think that this is all very related. So I get approached by this all the time, particularly in the bill that we were just crafting that would offer a sentence reduction to people that many legislators wanted to exclude those with violent crimes attached to their marijuana crimes. And to be very honest, Dr. Muhammad is right. For a long time, we couldn't say this, but now we are very clear that we're here to fight and release as many people as possible. And that these other crimes, however you want to label them, because the state labeling something as violent is actually pretty offensive and laughable, honestly, when the state is the most violent player and actor out here, right? So it's also like, how do you all define violence? And are we acting in that way? So I would also just look at that. And so, and like the lawful drug conviction, again, we don't believe that any of these charges can actually be held with any type of real dignity in the way that we've seen this types of carceral systems practiced and built. So we actually just don't validate the system. We don't allow that validation to drive our decisions and advocacy. And we are always here to free as many people as possible. So I would even challenge the idea of calling this mass incarceration. Every time I see it, I actually cross out the word mass and say it's just our incarceration, because that also creates this idea of some people deserve and lawfully and these types of things. I also dropped in a resource called Don't Be a Propagandist. I also work as a movement journalist, and it's something that myself, Andrea, Richie, folks at Interrupting Criminalization with Marian Kaba put together. And we're also doing one for the drug war coming up in the spring too, but it's about language specifically with journalists, but it's good for everyone.
Wow, thank you. Mako?
Yeah, so what I wanted to say to that and kind of transition us, and okay, I'm saying this as yeah. Just like we know that race is socially constructed, that gender is socially constructed, laws are socially constructed, okay? And so what is criminal on the books in 2023 was not criminal on the books in 1965, okay? And so when we talk about like mass incarceration, I use that for a particular historical phenomenon. This is a result of ascendant policies and practices, meaning that there were new policies created, longer sentences created, with the combination of the family policing system, the demobilization of social welfare. We have neoliberalism rising at the same time. We have an employment stagnation, and we also have we're going through an inflation. This confluence of these things and crime scares and the unified crime report that comes out that where localities are reporting new crimes. All of this is a confluence of things that are coming together, and where we as a people are voting for representatives that are creating these laws that are putting people behind bars. And when we specifically think about drug laws, there's a book that I may not be given the full title, like Race, Crime, and Punishment or whatever. Every drug law in the United States was built, was designed to target a particular racial other. So marijuana is particularly designed at first to target our brothers and sisters from the south of the border. Okay, all the heroin is specifically designed to target like Black folks. The 1-to-1, the 1-to-100 ratio is specifically like designed to target Black folks. These are about like a social construction. You're creating laws to create corporal bodies or to control bodies and to segregate people, to exclude and confine. And so part of the reason why we do these webinars and the justice education system is to help understand kind of root causes and like how these things came about. And so the reason why we do this work in educational justice is because there is a such thing called incarceration, and because people have been denied educational opportunities. And so the question is, why? And so we're trying to grapple with the why. What is the social construction of the criminal legal system that disproportionately confines people that look like me and the people that are here? And what is it about the United States that makes it the largest confiner of persons and makes every state have the largest incarceration population compared to other countries? Okay, and so let's kind of want to answer, like get at that. We're at 7:25 right now. I want to close us out with saying like thank you to our panelists. This is a conversation starter. It is not the only conversation that we should be having about this. You have the contact information of the people that are on this panel. We shared that we talked about this article called "The Black Family in the Age of Mass Incarceration" by Ta-Nehisi Coates that you can go. That has its own bibliography in there. And if you email us, we can send you more resources. Thank you to Dr. Muhammad for moderating this panel. And Sarah, if you could, can you share the presentation again? And so as we close out, please, as you close out, you're going to get a survey. So please take that survey to give us feedback on this. But then also, the work at the PD Green program, we're a nonprofit organization. The money that we raise goes to support the incarcerated learners and the formerly incarcerated learners that we're supporting. We do this justice education series because it's part of our mission to educate our volunteers on the injustices manifest in the carceral system and help them become advocates for systemic change. So we're asking you to donate. If this is you've had a great sermon at this revival, and so now I'm asking that you donate. You can give $1 or give 500 or 1,000 or even more. I'm not going to limit that, but please donate. You can donate at pdgreen.org/donate. You can donate on Venmo. You can donate after the survey when you get your tax refund. When Jackson Hewitt send that to you, you can send us some money also. But please donate. Continue to support the PD Green program. We have 2 more webinars this semester that we're doing in partnership with the Center for African American History and Culture at Virginia Union. The next one is a conversation with Dr. Treva Lindsay about her book, America Goddamn, which talks about the criminalization of Black women and girls. And then the final one is where we're going to have Black-led student organizations from Howard University, Morehouse University, and via Virginia Student Power to talk about how Black college students are confronting the carceral state, so that our volunteers can learn about how they can participate in various movements to bring about justice. So again, we thank you for hanging out with us. Please continue to do learning and do some work in various areas. And we are out. I don't have a closing song, but we're out. So thank y'all very much.